Terrific. Good morning, good afternoon to you all. Well, good morning to some, and welcome. It's great to have you here again. And for those joining for the first time, my name is Peter Christoph. I'm the convener of the Great Ocean Road Communities Network, or GORCN, and with its 23 members, it's a group that is responsible for this tourism webinar series. I'll be moderating this fourth session of our webinar series on tourism, reimagining, and the Great Ocean Road. To begin, I would like to acknowledge Australia's First Peoples in their custodianship of country over many millennia, and their cultural wealth and their generosity and depth of insight into this continent, which they continue to share with us. I want to pay my respects to their elders past and present and offer my special welcome to any Indigenous folk online today. And I specifically want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung from whose land I'm joining this webinar. The Great Ocean Road is an exceptionally beautiful region of national and indeed international ecological and cultural importance, and it's a tourism magnet of significant value. However, there's growing concern within our communities about whether its growing numbers of visitors is beyond the limits of ecological and social sustainability. This webinar series aims to help us better understand the drivers and pressures that propel tourism, particularly in our region, to explore alternative forms of sustainable or regenerative tourism for the Great Ocean Road. And it aims specifically, and this is really the focus of today's and next week's webinars, to let us hear from and engage with key Victorian public agencies about the strategies, the policies, the aspirations which govern tourism in our region, and including in that process talking about co-designing regenerative tourism alternatives. In the first webinar, Anna Pollock talked in detail about global tourism's current drivers. Tourism's grown exponentially into an economic force. It's large scale, it's industrial, and sometimes also destructive, causing cultural clashes, pollution, strains in public infrastructure, threats to native species, and reducing the quality of life for residents in particular communities. Such tourism cannot be sustained indefinitely. And so in the second webinar, Diane Dredge discussed regenerative tourism alternatives. In other words, tourism that's resilient, diversified, recognises social and ecological limits, has strong local input and careful control over impacts. And we had some great examples, great local examples of enterprises which follow these sorts of guidelines, if you like, from Lizzie Cork and from Joey Sanders. And then in the third webinar, Liz Price from GORT gave us a granular sense of what tourism in the Great Ocean Road looks like now, its complexity and its trends. She enabled us to get a clearer, data-driven sense of the practical and regulatory challenges that such tourism poses for our region. Tourism, still recovering from the COVID downturn, is predominantly local, and it always has been in our region. Visitations are very strongly, in numerical terms, from within Victoria, and mainly from Melbourne, including specifically Western Melbourne and Geelong. Its growth is predicted to be driven by, as much as anything else, local population growth. Comparatively, international tourism is only a small proportion of the regional total, and mostly focused on the Surf Coast. There's great unevenness, and Liz's data showed this, in visitations geographically, in other words, across the region, and across seasons and holidays and even times of day. Tourism, nevertheless, is a strong but variable contributor to employment on the Surf Coast and Coal Lake Otway, but there are limitations on it, posed by transport type and infrastructure, by accommodation, and of course, by the environment itself. And ensuring that tourism is appropriate to these limiting factors is one of our challenges. As the questions and comments in the earlier sessions have suggested, visitation is not self-regulating, especially in terms of sustainability. At present, we seem to be seeing more of everything. In other words, more extractive tourism or industrial tourism, as well as tourism which is sensitive and regenerative. So what is the role and what are the limits of state planning and regulation? Public agencies have responsibilities for monitoring, anticipating, preemptively planning, and then implementing good policies to limit negative impacts on coastal towns and environment while managing tourism for its benefits. The previous webinars, I think, raised three broad concerns. Firstly, about data and planning for sustainability and regenerative tourism. There are questions about how we're measuring and ensuring sustainability, questions about the availability and the robustness of data on the Great Ocean Road's tourism in its current social and economic impacts and expected trends. Secondly, as a broad concern, there's a problem or a question around regulating impacts. Given the nature of Great Ocean Road's regional tourism, how do you create resilience and diversity in the sector locally? What mix of market-based and private investment and public-driven regulatory and investment activities do we need to see? What are the difficulties for regulating visitation and also limiting the impacts on species and communities? In specifically, what is the use and the mix of possible regulatory and market-based mechanisms? How will they come together? And what are the issues associated with implementation? And the third issue of broad concern, I think, has to do with economic return and revenue flows. What's the size and the flow of monies generated by tourism? What is it? Where does it go? Including how much of it comes back into the region as public revenue for managing tourism, its impacts and its development. It's with some of these considerations and questions in mind that we turn today to look in greater detail at the strategic and policy frameworks and actions that shape the Great Ocean Road and its region. We're going to hear agencies' views about the key problems and prospects for tourism governance, and also the questions that arise when we're talking about sustainable tourism, alternative approaches to mass tourism that actually fit into our landscape, and how you do that with policy. And the questions and the puzzles that tourism governance at multiple levels of government actually might produce. Okay, so having said that, now let me introduce our three speakers, and it is going to be a rich and packed agenda today. First of all, and just in introducing these speakers, I also should say that we'll have these three. In addition, we have a number of people from the Shires who are providing backup should at the end of this session we find there are specific questions which are more appropriately directed to them. Our first speaker is Mirava Holmes, who's currently the Acting Director of Tourism Policy and Programs at the Department of Jobs, Skills, Industries and Regions, or DJSIR in Victoria. She's worked in private industry and government, including the National Trust of Australia, City of Melbourne, Engineers Australia, Melbourne Water and EarthCheck. Mirava has judged in both the Victorian and Queensland Tourism Awards, as well as the United Nations Environment Awards, and was the winning facilitator for the Queensland Government's Circular Economy Lab. Our second speaker is going to be Ruth Caldwell. Ruth is Regional Director at Barwon Southwest, the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action, or DEECA. And she's responsible for DEECA's regional delivery of projects and services alongside statewide lead roles for coastal protection assets, coastal adaptation planning, and the Great Ocean Road Reform Program. Ruth's previous roles in the department include the establishment of an enduring emergency recovery function and the development of a portfolio management approach to the implementation of the circular economy policy. And the third speaker, someone as I'm sure known to many of us, is Jodie Sizer. Jodie is the CEO of the Great Ocean Road Parks and Coastal Authority, or GORCAPA. She's a Djab Wurrung and Gonditjmara Mara woman and among Australia's foremost Indigenous leaders. Jodie was a co-founder and co-CEO of PricewaterhouseCoopers Indigenous Consulting. She is chair of the Australian Institute of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Studies, or AITSIS, and she's vice president of the Collingwood Football Club, for which I'm very grateful, board member of the Ebony Institute, and an enterprise professor at the University of Melbourne. Jodie has worked with tertiary institutions, governments, sports codes, and major businesses in creating meaningful change for Aboriginal people. Sitting behind all of this for the moment, we also have, as I said, three people. Matt Taylor, who is the Surf Coast Shire's Manager of Economic Development, Arts and Tourism, and he will be providing comment on anything that is appropriate for discussion in relation to the Surf Coast Shire. Ian Sawyer, the General Manager, Development and Community Services at the Colac Otway Shire. And Penny Spolder, who's a Senior Associate at TRC Tourism, who may be able to provide, or may be called upon to provide, additional facts and interpretation by Ruth. I have an apology as well from Justin Linley, who's the Director of Sustainable Development at the Corangamite Shire Council, who's unable to make this meeting but will be able to be present at the meeting next week. So we're going to hear from the three main speakers, one after another. This will be followed by about 20 minutes of question and answer, and I suspect that we should concentrate either on questions going to Mirava, who won't be able to be there next week, or questions of clarification, setting up the discussion for next week's panel session. Having said that, please keep your mics and microphones and cameras off. Questions in early, and over to you, Mirava.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to have a go here. We're okay there? Can you see that, Peter?
Certainly can see you.
Fantastic. All right, so can you see the presentation? All okay?
Can't see your presentation yet, Mirava.
Okay, bear with me. How about now?
Perfect.
All right. Hi, everybody, and thanks, Peter, for that warm welcome. Great to be part of this series. I'm Mirava Holmes, and I'm Acting Director of Tourism in the Department of Job Skills, Industry and Region, or DJSIR, as we like to say. I'd like to start too by acknowledging the traditional owners of which I'm coming from today, the Wurundjeri people, and acknowledge elders past and present, and that sovereignty was never ceded. And I'd also like to acknowledge First Peoples on the call today as well. Prior to my role here, I came from industry, having worked with organisations such as the National Trust of Australia, and I'm a classically trained waiter and PCO, or professional conference organiser by trade. So I started in the department as a industry manager, and I'm quite proud of where I've come from. Just a bit of dry data to start the presentation before we get into the policy and strategy from the Victorian perspective. Victoria's visitor economy is an integral part of the national visitor economy and a national visitor market that has rebounded strongly after the pandemic. In the decade before COVID-19, the visitor economy grew 66% compared to 55% growth in the national economy, and that's outlined in Thrive 2020, which I'll come to. Since COVID, the national visitor economy rebounded strongly, growing to 30% above pre-pandemic levels. In terms of visitor spending nationally, in the year ending September 2024, $110.3 billion in annual domestic overnight spending. There was $30.7 billion in day trip spending and $32.3 billion in international visitor spending. 38% of that spending occurred in regional areas. A rebounding of the national economy is a key target in the National Strategic Plan for the Visitor Economy, Thrive 2030, a policy that's carried through from AUSTRADE in the federal government. Thrive 2030 provides a vision, sets targets, and outlines policy priorities to grow the national economy, or the visitor economy rather. The three targets outlined in the plan for the visitor economy are returning it to $166 billion by 2024, and this target was achieved ahead of schedule. Growing it then to $230 billion by 2030, and regional Australia to capture 40% of spending. As mentioned, we're currently sitting at 38%. Thrive sets out a three-step plan for the national visitor economy: recover, consolidation, and acceleration. The visitor economy has just exited the recovery phase, both according to the plan and according to the target of reaching $166 billion by 2024. This phase was about domestic visitation leading recovery, with smaller than usual international visitation and with the focus on addressing supply side issues such as workforce shortages. Consolidation, the phase that we're currently in, is about ensuring ongoing growth while making investments into new experiences and marketing new destinations, helping the sector to improve business practices and helping businesses build workforce capabilities. The final phase, acceleration, is about raising the quality of visitor experiences in a bid to further grow visitation and visitor spending. This includes capitalising on investments being made today and further assisting the sector to drive quality products. Now to Victoria's position. Victoria's tourism sector has broken a new record for spending, reaching $39.7 billion in visitor spending for the year ending September 2024. That represents a 26% increase over pre-pandemic levels. That growth marks an 8% growth from the previous year, despite a softening in domestic tourism, a trend that we're also seeing nationally. This growth was primarily driven by international spending, which rose 57%, with intrastate overnight spend up by 2%. Visitor numbers, the total visitor numbers declined 4% to 86.9 million, remaining 10% below 2019 levels. This was driven by an 8% drop in domestic day trips, likely reflecting tighter consumer spending. Intrastate overnight visitors increased by 4% from the previous year, with a strong rebound in international visitors at 41%. Total visitor nights reached 156.2 million in the year ending September 2024, and an increase of 23% from the previous year and on par with 2019. So the department, DJSIR, that I sit in, and tourism and events where I represent in the sports and experience economy portfolio, our team particularly provides policy, strategy and industry development advice to both the government and industry. We also work with tourism and events entities across the state. Our responsibilities include planning and delivering Victoria's visitor economy strategies, supporting the growth of Victoria's events calendar, delivering tourism infrastructure programs, facilitating investment opportunities, and channeling industry engagement into government, governance support for tourism and event portfolio entities, data and research to inform decision-making and investment by government and industry, and finally, identifying opportunities for cross-sector collaboration. And that includes things like investment, trade, regional development, conventions, business events, and major events. Why are we not moving forward? Oh, there we go. Bear with me. The Victorian Government seeks to help grow the visitor economy through the implementation of our plan for the Victorian visitor economy. Experience Victoria, or as we affectionately call it, EV33, is the statewide strategic plan for the visitor economy. The need for this strategic plan was identified through the Regional Tourism Review in 2019. This then formed part of the commitments under the 2021 Visitor Economy Recovery and Reform Plan, or with a classic acronym for state government, VERP, as we like to call it. EV33 will be our lead policy document for the visitor economy for the next 10 years, and it articulates our priorities for future tourism investment, industry strengthening, and local product development. The audience for this plan sits across three elements. That includes industry, so investors and operators, giving certainty around our statewide priorities, but also setting state expectations for tourism development and innovation. State government, a plan that positions us to be more cohesive across government to maximise benefits of the visitor economy through complementary programs, including grant funding. And local government and RTBs, or visitor economy partnerships, which we call for Victoria the Regional Tourism Network. This aligns local and place-based work with statewide objectives. EV33 was developed with a view to working with these partners to implement the plan. The plan itself was informed by extensive engagement, including a program design, research and data. We published a directions paper through the Engage Victoria platform for industry feedback, and the paper tested the key inclusions and policies we wanted to see out of the vision. And we received over 115 submissions, both online and offline, and are working feedback through into the final plan itself, which is now complete. Like all work and policy we do, it was backed by evidence, both internally through our research team and externally with consultants and Visit Victoria. To finalise it, a communications plan was done with collateral tailored to industry and government stakeholders, but was also developed to drive further buy-in and awareness of EV33. The document and the plan itself is a shared vision for the next 10 years to make Victoria a leader in delivering exceptional, diverse, connected and inclusive experiences for all visitors. We'll do this by coordinating tourism development and catalysing investment to achieve the greatest impact. Supporting innovative products will not only create jobs, but will also boost visitation and encourage visitors to stay longer and spend more. The plan seeks to drive also investment across 5 product categories: First Peoples, wellness, arts and culture, food and drink, and nature. And these reflect our competitive strengths and new areas where Victoria can lead for Australia and a global destination. The plan also outlines 9 critical elements to support industry to be more resilient, competitive, and overcome barriers such as workforce shortages. They include key settings such as growth of workforce, visitor servicing, community engagement, and data insights. An example of the opportunities identified under the food and drink priority is an area we have identified to be a competitive strength for Victoria. We will work with stakeholders to showcase our clean, green Victorian produce and make it easier for producers to get into agritourism. We will collaborate with organisations such as Food and Drink Victoria to use events such as the Food and Wine Festival to promote our produce, dining and innovative drink scene right across the regions. Another example is the opportunity under the wellness product, a hugely growing opportunity for Victoria, and one that's we're seeing in most regions in Victoria, but also seeing it especially along the Great Ocean Road. We are looking to grow this sector, working with industry to make it easier for wellness operators to enter the market. We want to work with operators and peak bodies to showcase and market the state's unique bathing offering, and we are also working to better connect wellness experiences with other product areas, for example, food, arts, sports and business events. Within sports and the experience economy, we also have an investment facilitation team, and this team works with external proponents and provides both support face-to-face and also through resources like the Tourism Investment Guidelines. Now to the region-specific conversation, and that's what has our team done, particularly in tourism and events, to grow the visitor economy along the Great Ocean Road. So I'm just talking here about tourism and events and strategic reform under the DJSIR portfolio. And the department has provided over $2.7 million worth of funding directly to the Great Ocean Road Regional Tourism Board, or Visitor Economy Partnership, since 2020-21, which is when the Visitor Economy Recovery and Reform Plan was announced. This funding has gone to a range of activities, including supporting the core operations of the board, updating the region's destination management plan, and strengthening activities such as resilience and growth of the region's visitor economy and development of a visitor servicing strategy. And you heard from Liz Price recently on this. Importantly, in alignment with EV33 has been other pieces of work that represent those key settings in EV33, which I mentioned before. The irresponsible behaviour of visitors is emerging as a significant global tourism issue, creating environmental impacts and community resentment. In regional Victoria, there are increasing reports of irresponsible behaviour by visitors, which are not only creating safety risks for visitors and locals alike, but jeopardising the industry's social licence with local communities. This behaviour includes harassment of wildlife, straying from official lookouts and paths, trespassing on private property, and toileting in public places and littering. The Victorian Government is supporting the statewide rollout of an innovative campaign being led by the Great Ocean Road Regional Tourism Board to encourage responsible behaviour from visitors in regional Victoria. Entitled Beware the Naughty Things, the campaign was launched as a pilot in December 2024 and utilises humour and quirky animated characters, the naughty things, to raise awareness of responsible and safe behaviours that they can adopt while visiting the Great Ocean Road region. The campaign presents several potential benefits, including maintaining and improving local communities' acceptance of tourism by addressing key issues of concern like litter, trespassing on private property and feeding wildlife, improving the visitor experience and community amenity through a reduction in litter and addressing other responsible behaviours, and a consistent statewide approach to encouraging responsible behaviour by visitors. And we're doing that through fostering collaboration between the visitor economy partnerships or regional tourism boards, state government agencies and councils. And finally, reducing the increasing instances of irresponsible behaviour that have been reported over the summer period, including those that have resulted in death or injury. Beyond the Great Ocean Road, other work continues to drive those key settings for all destinations. And while our chief goals in the visitor economy are to grow the sector and increasing visitor spending, the government is also committed to ensuring tourism is sustainable, balancing the community's economic interests alongside environmental, sustainable and community interests. The Victorian Government have endorsed the National Sustainability Framework for the Visitor Economy, which sets out 4 pillars to sustainable tourism. Taking a managed approach to sustainability, which involves embedding business practices and procedures to ensure sustainability goals are achieved. Implementing environmental and climate action by taking action to protect wildlife and nature reducing greenhouse gas emissions, adapt and build resilience to climate change, and responsibly using resources, which includes reducing waste and recycling. Importantly, respecting culture by acknowledging and engaging appropriately with First Nations people and other cultural groups, and by helping to protect and conserve cultural heritage consistent with the principles of self-determination. And lastly, creating positive social impact by working collaboratively and cooperatively with visitors, employees, suppliers, and local communities. And I'm almost finished here, but I just wanted to sort of end with some of the future work that we're looking at and some support for industry. And there are a series of pillar plans and industry strengthening programs that are being developed or have started to be implemented after the release of EB33. Importantly, we are in the process of releasing a First Peoples tourism plan, which is about to make its way through Cabinet. This has been an extensive project over the last 3 years and has been heavily engaged with community and First Peoples. Supporting this is a commitment to work with the Yuma-Yurrumbilla Council and the Koori Caucus, Victoria's first ever First Peoples tourism body. And lastly, with our minister portfolio having grown to now include the environment and outdoor recreation portfolios recently, we continue to work on the commitment to release a nature-based tourism strategy. This is a complex piece of work that needs to connect other parts of government like Parks Victoria, DEECA and transition economies. So I just wanted to close out by connecting or highlighting that we, after many years, and some people might know someone called Dr. Stuart Topless, who is one of Australia's leaders in sustainable tourism, and he's in our team as well. We have quite a significant trove of information that sits on our tourism.vic.gov.au website, from things from road signage, so we manage the brown signs, to small business support. And we also have quite a substantial research tool on the website as well. So I'll end on that. And if you've got any questions, please also feel free to email the email address on screen. My team directly look after that, so it comes to me. Otherwise, that's it from me.
Terrific, Miro. Thank you so much for that. That's great. There are lots of questions, and I just want to acknowledge that. We're going to hold the questions over until we've had all three speakers speak. So, without further ado, Ruth Call, please. Hi, Ruth.
Hello, and thank you, Pia, for that warm introduction. Testing, you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Beautiful, and we've got slides good to go. So it would be remiss for me to start my presentation without commending yourself and the community network in initiating this series and bringing us all together to discuss the challenges and opportunities of tourism within the Great Ocean Road region. And it is a really important and seminal series, so thank you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging Eastern Maar people and Wadawurrung people as the original custodians of the Great Ocean Road region, and land, waters, seas and skies, and that is my focus of my presentation today. And I honour elders past and present and express gratitude for their sharing of wisdom that's ensured the continuation of culture and traditional practices. So today I've been asked to talk about the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action, or DEECA's role in strategic policy and governance relating to tourism in the region. And look, I note that Gorkin have set us up with a really great agenda here, taking us from that statewide view to a regional view and then onto the local view. So again, it's a great setup and provides us with that context to work through some of the questions that I'm seeing popping up in the chat as we move along too. So I want to share with you some work we're doing to develop the Great Ocean Road Region Strategic Framework Plan, just rolls off the tongue, that will include, amongst other key elements, a visitor management framework. And if we jump to my next slide, this just gives you a sense of the hierarchy of the plan in some of what we're talking through. So the plan, or SFP, Strategic Framework Plan, that we're delivering is required under the Great Ocean Road and Environs Protection Act 2020. And it's required to provide an overarching regional view of land use planning for the region that'll link state planning policy and strategies, such as you can see at the top there, the recently released Plan Victoria and the state's tourism strategy that Miriva just talked us through with Experience, or EB33, and then takes us through with other local and regional strategies such as GORT's Visitor Economy Master Plan for the Great Ocean Road region and local destination management plans. Now, I do want to call out the plans on the screen are examples and they won't be a definitive list for the region, but it's just to give you some context of where the strategic framework plan that I'm talking to sits. So the plan will have a 50-year outlook and will, once approved, replace the current Great Ocean Road region strategy that was released in 2004. And ultimately, it'll provide strategic direction for the future land use and sustainable economic development across the region, and with recognised status as an incorporated document in relevant local planning schemes. And it's to provide a framework for coordinated decision-making for the 17 responsible entities that are listed in the Great Ocean Road Environment Protection Act. And to borrow a phrase I understand from previous speakers, it's really the Great Ocean Road region's community of caretakers. So the point I'm making here with the plan I'm talking to today is that it builds off and aligns with existing strategic planning work, and it'll inform other regional and local plans. It doesn't exist in isolation. And it will include plans for visitation in the region. Also worth noting as I take us through this is that this plan itself won't provide localised direction. Obviously, that's the role of local planning activities, including structure planning, but it will provide a framework for a coordinated decision-making in those spaces. So if we jump to the next slide, before I go any further, I'm just going to clarify the region that'll be addressed by the strategic framework plan, and that it is not the same as the Great Ocean Road Tourism region. Many of you working with state governments will know we have many different regions for different things. So just to clarify that the focus of the strategic framework plan is on the area illustrated in Plan Victoria and highlighted on the map on the screen with the red perimeter boundary. So as you can see, it's bounded with Torquay in the east and Warrnambool in the west, and does include the hinterland area up to and including the towns along the Princes Highway. And it also includes Victorian waters out 3 nautical miles to be exact. So for reference as well, the Great Ocean Road Coast and Parks, or GORCAPA, and you'll hear from Jodie next, is the dedicated park manager for the public coastal land and waters along the Great Ocean Road. And you can see that's outlined down the bottom there along the coast. And of course, that includes the popular nature-based visitor destinations along the Surf Coast and Bells Beach and 12 Apostles, to name a few. So a bit of background to how we've been putting this strategic framework plan together. So it is informed by extensive technical work, and those various technical inputs are reaching completion. And they do include a detailed landscape character and significance assessment. They include cultural values assessments of the landscapes by the Eastern Maar Aboriginal Corporation and Wadawurrung Traditional Owners Aboriginal Corporation. They include specialist advice on historic heritage, as well as tourism, as well as access, transport and bushfire risk across the region. So it gives you that picture that tourism is one input, but it's a broader land use plan that is addressing and balancing a number of these inputs. So we're also drawing on DEECA's data and research on Victoria's changing climate as well to inform the final plan. And all the technical reports I've just referred to will be available on our webpage in coming months. So given today we're talking tourism, I'll focus on the tourism component of the plan. And what I'm going to take us through is how the plan is proposing to provide, what it will provide and its key directions, a proposed visitor management framework, proposed benefits of that approach, and a bit of an overview of where we are now and how, you know, our community of caretakers can contribute and can continue to contribute to the development of the plan. So if we jump to the next slide, It'll be a slide probably not unfamiliar to anyone, and I gather, Liz, if you're on the call, I should thank you for these photos that I understand are, you know, a bit dated, but still very relevant to us all. And in the 3 webinar sessions that have preceded this one, you know, we've heard about the negative impact of unmanaged visitation and tourism on local communities and the environment. It's something most people on this call will experience and live daily. And among the issues identified, again, I think I'm preaching to the converted, but, you know, things like overcrowding at popular destinations, safety, diminished visitor experiences, environmental damage and degradation, inadequate facilities, the costs that then get imposed on local communities, in particular through maintaining or maintenance and servicing visitor facilities, traffic management by council and the state. And then that's all balanced on top of the minimal spend in some areas, in some local communities, as well as at some of our most popular destinations, such as the 12 Apostles. So, you know, that paints a fairly average picture, but we all know tourism can be positive. And in the previous session as well, I think Dr. Diane Dredge was also talking about regenerative tourism, probably more eloquently pronounced than that. And we're talking about tourism that makes that positive contribution that benefits the region and community and the environment, which is an aspiration I think we all can ascribe to. So today I want to support the idea of active visitation management across the Great Ocean Road region as the basis for addressing the visitation challenges and ensuring that tourism makes a positive contribution that benefits local communities and the environment. And this, for all of us, might mean using different levers available to us to manage visitation. And this could be things like incentivising visitation at different times of the day or seasons, re-examining tour operator licence conditions, staggering visitor numbers at popular locations at times when we see overcrowding. And that overcrowding, as you can see on the screen, really diminishes that visitor experience and the driver for why our visitors are coming in the first place. It also degrades the attraction, in which a lot of cases in our region are the natural environment, and impacts on the livability of local communities as well. So all this needs to go hand in hand with developing new visitor experiences and supporting the infrastructure across the region that attracts visitors and disperses visitors away from just the popular destination and disperses visitation and ultimately their expenditure across the region and including in the off-peak season. So such an approach seeks to create that positive contribution to the environment and the prosperity and livability of local communities. It would also need to consider short-term actions and changes as well as achieving these longer-term goals. And this approach can only obviously be achieved with strong collaboration between the state, local governments, the tourism industry and local communities and local land managers. So if we jump to the next slide, I'm just having a quick look at the comments. Yeah, okay, I'll keep going. So we're proposing as part of this approach a visitation or a visitor management framework component of the bigger land use strategic framework plan that would include 4 key elements that would see us shift to that active, sustainable, responsible and balanced visitor management. So as part of that proposal, things we're considering would be visitation principles and policies. Then that would look to guide future visitation related strategies and actions in the region. A visitor destination hierarchy, and that might look to define preferred long-term visitation role of key destinations in the region and establish the broad types of visitor infrastructure that are appropriate or required for each of those locations. A risk-based assessment tool, and this would essentially be for use by decision makers to assess potential visitation minimums and maximums and across key destinations across the region, and that would inform strategies to ensure appropriate visitation. And then, of course, place-based strategic directions focusing on specific locations and visitation management opportunities to guide future land use decisions. So today I'm going to dive into the first three of these proposals and give you an insight into some of the early thinking that's working through some of these. So if we jump to the next slide. So the first one is around the principles and the policies. So these will be high level, and they would reflect what we've heard from talking to everyone on this call and other key stakeholders over the past years. We'd also be looking to it to align with UN World Tourism Organization strategies for managing tourism over time. And some of those examples for what some of these principles or policies might look like are things like promoting dispersal of visitors with the region and beyond, ensure local communities benefit from tourism, stimulate new visitor itineraries and attractions to support visitor dispersal, and limiting tourism and visitor accommodation uses in areas of high environmental, landscape or cultural heritage significance, or areas of high risk, including bushfire risk, and ensuring local communities benefit from tourism. So when we get there, the full set of these proposed principles and policies will be shared for feedback and during an upcoming community consultation and submission process, which I'll talk to at the end of this presentation. The next point I wanted to talk to there are recognising differences across the region in terms of destination hierarchies. So if we jump to the next slide, and thank you, I think Bridget, it's you in the background doing this for me, so thank you. The second element we'd be looking at is this idea of a destination hierarchy. So it recognises something we all know, that different destinations have different potential to support different types of visitation. So a spatial assessment that recognises the cultural, historic and natural features of key visitor destinations, towns and settlements, and defines the future role of these destinations is proposed to be included. And what it would do would recognise at a local level the capacity that each of these destinations has to grow or evolve over time. And it would also identify the nature of the infrastructure that may be required to support the role and or visitor capacity of that destination. So the management framework would ultimately categorise, or what we're thinking, would categorise the roles that key visitor destinations play in the region. And to give you an example of just making that a bit less abstract, it'd be things like recognising the role of major natural attractions. So the iconic places people think of when they think of the Great Ocean Road, and where is there that potential for the high number of visitors, things like the 12As and the Surf Coast beaches. And then you might consider other types of attractions such as the townships and the commercial attractions in and around that may have the ability to absorb additional visitation and help disperse the visitors across the district and disperse that spend as well. And then amongst that too, you've got your small coastal hamlets that are considered constrained in terms of public spaces and may not necessarily have the capacity for large volume of visitors. So for each of these types of categories, you would then have the types and level of infrastructure that might be appropriate or reasonable to support visitation, and you'd have that identified in a consistent framework. And, you know, types of on-ground infrastructure would be anything from information centres, visitor amenities, interpretive signs, walking trails, all the way through to, you know, types of parking. So that just gives you an insight into the kind of thinking in terms of a destination hierarchy. Now, if we jump to the next slide, and this is a very exciting piece of work around looking at a risk-based assessment tool that could be used to inform the management of visitation of destinations across the region. So, you know, the tool uses a threshold-based approach with state and local government, Gorton and Gorkapa obviously, and other land managers working together with the tourism industry and local communities to define minimum and maximum thresholds for acceptable risk in terms of the impacts of visitation on a number of things, including visitor experience, environment, cultural values, local community and local economies. And these thresholds help identify where and when visitor experiences can be promoted, and likewise when it would need to be limited. Now, this tool has been used in tourism destinations around the world, and one example I'll give you is in the city of Amsterdam, where this approach was used to set minimum and maximum number of visitors, and it established those thresholds from an upper and lower limit and used those as warning signs. And so when you reach those thresholds, various management actions such as redirecting visitors to lesser known areas, imposing restrictions, or limiting tour groups could then be contemplated and put into action. And I think it's important to note that this doesn't just talk to higher limits, it also talks to lower visitation limits, which are equally as important to be triggering interventions to increase some of those off-peak visitation to ensure that year-round viability of businesses is servicing visitors as well. So we could take a similar approach to destinations within the Great Ocean Road region and leverage GORT's destination planning work. And obviously this is a proposal and we're still working through the tool components, but it could include consideration of things like local economy and dependence on that, on tourism, local community and the ratio of visitors to residents, visitor experience at place, infrastructure capacity, and impact on nature and the environment, as well as impact on cultural heritage sites and values. And there's a range of interventions that can be used to actively manage that in a coordinated way across our regions. And that's what we'd be looking for this to be achieving in a coordinated way, in that once those thresholds are agreed, the monitoring of tourism tourism activities and levels of visitation can then inform pre-agreed management actions. And as I mentioned, tools like this are used widely in some popular destinations internationally and have been tested. So if I move to the next slide, what I have outlined today is a real active approach to visitation management to benefit us all in the Great Ocean Road region more holistically. And for it to work, however, it requires all of us to have agreed objectives for managing visitation of destinations and locations to which visitors would be directed and when. All our collective land managers and government agencies to have a clear understanding of the framework we'd be operating in, that ongoing collaboration and active management of visitation, and of course, hearing the voices of our communities. And from my perspective, the benefits of this approach include a visitor experience that is celebrated and also contributes ultimately to our ecosystems and communities and economies. So if we jump to the end, let me just do a quick, yeah, great. So the last slide, just to give you a sense of our next steps and the work that we're doing with this. So we continue to collaborate with our traditional owners and responsible entities and land managers as we develop the draft plan. And there will be opportunities to consider all of the elements of the plan and provide feedback on it during a consultation period, which will be later this year or potentially early next year. But well in advance of that consultation period, we'll be releasing the key background technical studies on our websites, and we'll make sure you have that information available through the network. And look, to sum up, I think, you know, this is an iconic region, and it is important to Victorians that active visitation management is required to ensure that visitation really makes a positive contribution. It benefits the region and local communities and the environment. And so that's me, and I thank you for your time today and look forward to continuing to work with you all as we design up the strategic framework plan, and look forward to questions later in the day and next week. Thank you, Peter.
Ruth, consummate performance. Thank you so much, both you and Mira, have been just precise 20-minute performances and incredibly rich with lots of things, lots of questions coming up as well. I think we probably will need yet another webinar to deal with those beyond next week. Thank you so much. Jody, may I hand it over to you?
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you, Ruth. Perfect segue and timing for us. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. I too want to commence by creating yet, importantly, a fourth acknowledgement of country, and I would like to pay due respect to the traditional owners of the Great Ocean Road region, being the Wadawurrung people and the Eastern Mar. And I pay my respects to the traditional owners as both rights holders and First Nations people. I thank the generosity of their elders for their knowledge and their wisdom, which informs and guides our work as we care for this incredible natural asset in the Great Ocean Road. This afternoon, I'm going to present in two halves. Really, I know that as a relatively new organisation, the authority in its full remit is not fully known to all that have potentially dialed into this conversation this afternoon. But I know importantly, I've seen and I've heard through our first 4 years of establishment that our communities and our stakeholders are really impatiently and appropriately impatiently looking for the solution and the way forward. And before I commence and kick into the detail, I would like to acknowledge the speakers who have set the perfect framework for the conversation thus far. And I thoroughly enjoyed our conversations by Anna Pollock, who did give that global perspective, and Dr. Diane Dredge, who brought that regenerative perspectives and has been in to speak with our team on that. The incredible local knowledge of Joey Saunders and our local leaders in Liz Price and the team from the Great Ocean Road. All a perfect setting today with our government colleagues in Miriva and Ruth to inform what is being done and what needs to be done. So for me, in the next 20 odd slides, I wanted to introduce, actually this is the most important slide of all, in introducing the Great Ocean Road Coast and Parks Authority. Who are we and why we established? And these two important points that you'll capture here are probably the two most important statements that we can make in us being one integrated living entity. And that statement as one integrated living entity is really the principle under which all of our work is formed. Ruth, if you could, Bridge, if you could pop back to the previous slide. That commitment to one integrated entity is our purpose for under which all of our work is designed. I've heard this conversation raised in some of our previous conversations thus far. And what is required for that to be fully lived and realised is a governance paradigm shift. And I was pleased to hear Anna Pollock speak to this. This is an active conversation within the authority, and we'll speak a little bit today about how we intend to do that. A governance paradigm shift really requiring us to be the leaders of change. And fundamentally, that is what a great deal of our work is about. And I see the conversation as recognise the complexity and the challenges, and to do things differently, we do need a paradigm shift. And fortunately, the authority has been created through the voices of the 21 communities, the many stakeholders, our 2 traditional owner groups, the evidence base that has been captured thus far to say the way in which we are currently managing the Great Ocean Road and its greater region is not good enough. We have a commitment to intergenerational equity to ensure that our next generation can enjoy the cultural, social, economic and environmental values of this region, as it is a National Heritage listed asset, should be a World Heritage listed asset. And it's with thanks to that advocacy of all of those groups that the authority has been created to help to assist and play its leading role as the lead agency for visitation management and guide that work. So what does that look like? I'm going to move fairly quickly through the first half a dozen slides to speak to a little bit more about who we are, and then we're going to speak to the solution. So it's really clear about the role of the authority if you want to jump onto the internet and have a look at the legislation and capture within section 48 our functions and our powers. And you can see there very promptly that our role is we were established as a state government authority under the Great Ocean Road Environment Protection Act, our own piece of legislation, to be the dedicated land manager for the Great Ocean Road Coast and Parks. For some, it may seem like we've been here for a little while, but it has only been 4 years since our establishment, and we've moved from managing 950 hectares of coastal reserves between Point and Possible Marengo, and we are undergoing a significant scale-up operation of functions will have responsibility to protect and manage visitation of the coast and parks along the full length of the Great Ocean Road, enabling a holistic approach to addressing the impacts of the increasing visitation, environmental processes and severe weather events impacted by climate change, as we've heard about. By the 1st of November this year, we will be responsible for managing 170,000 hectares of parks and coastal reserves along the Great Ocean Road, including 355 kilometres of coastline from Point Impossible to the Hopkins River. Several national parks, coastal town foreshores, and high visitation sites such as Cape Otway Light Station Tourism Precinct, the 12 Apostles Visitor Experience Centre, and the marine land to the edge of the Victorian waters. Importantly, one of our key principles that all revenue raised across the land of the Great Ocean Road is reinvested back into the land for now and for the generations to come. Now, quickly to this next slide, I love that we capture this image, and I have already mentioned that the Great Ocean Road is a National Heritage listed asset and is one of the world's most scenic and iconic coastal touring routes and Victoria's most significant tourism asset. The Great Ocean Road is an icon steeped in cultural values and history. The coastal and forested landscapes along the Great Ocean Road are of high cultural, ecological, economic and social importance to our traditional owners and to our 21 communities along the Great Ocean Road. We should recognise that in this history constructed for over 14 years by our returned servicemen, we recognise and respect that history along our 243 kilometres of Great Ocean Road, and we also recognise the custodianship of our traditional owners who have cared for this region for tens of thousands of years. But the Great Ocean Road is more than just a road. It's home to unique ecological assets and diverse flora and fauna found nowhere else in the world. It is a living memorial, it is a national treasure, and it's home for over 20,000 residents. So I did just want to take a moment to call that out and recognise that history. Our next slide speaks to the challenges. I'm not going to speak to that because I think we've all well prosecuted the challenges, and it's for those challenges and their complexity that we exist. So I'll move on to the next slide, which speaks a little bit further to that. Some of the complexity and the challenges is not just in what we inherently face within this region and many other regions, but we did recognise in the formation of the authority that the previous land management model was complex, and we had over 11 different land managers and over 30 different agencies who were coming together to implement the regulatory environment, work together with our communities, and the advocacy to come forth was that this is not the most efficient approach to care for an asset so precious and important to our communities as the Great Ocean Road. So one of the primary functions of the authority is to come together as that one single entity. This next slide really captures a very quick timeline of our formation, and what I wanted to echo here was the importance of recognising we are still in our formative years. I mentioned earlier that we're moving from managing 950 hectares to 170,000. That's a significant transformation in itself. That is on the back of a very long 10 to 20 plus years of advocacy to request the change. So I do recognise that impatience, as I mentioned at the beginning, but we are almost near the completion of our end state, and we look forward to further progressing the important strategic work. There's a couple of slides here that capture our management estate, and we'll move through those pretty quickly. The first one there captures the entire estate, which is the land and coastal waters, including our national parks. The next two, if we look very quickly, capture the beginnings in December 2020 through to the final end state, which we'll realise by the end of this year. And I think when you look at the estate in this visual, you can see the importance of capturing a whole of land and coastal asset view, a strategic view, a land management view, with consideration to the balance of one integrated living entity and all that that means. I'll move to our next slide as I try to move through this who we are conversation fairly quickly. We're really pleased as a new entity to be able to form that strategic direction together, working with our communities and our traditional owners, one of our most important characteristics of our legislation is that it requires us to work with our communities, who provide a very strong evidence base, knowledge and direction, bring citizen science together to inform our important work. It also requires us to work with our traditional owners and recognises the importance of that in leading self-determination. And with this whole of picture view, why would we want to do that any differently? What we can see in our formative years is that there are many agencies who are working together to inform the necessary strategic work. Some areas are very refreshing and building this from scratch, and I think Ruth's examples were some great direction there to say new ways of informing the evidence base, and I think that the state-based approach was also a new way and brings some innovation to how we've looked at this further. So looking at it in a whole, one integrated living entity for the whole of the Great Ocean Road region is a significant change, and again, I echo the importance of us being the leaders of that change. The next slide speaks to our statement of expectations, and whilst we have complex challenges to overcome, we're really clear in our legislation as to what our legislative responsibilities and how that translates to our strategic direction. So we speak to the importance, the Minister is quite specific in that actually, and articulates a statement of expectation which talks to our commitment to operational excellence in parks management and First Peoples self-determination, visitor enjoyment and appreciation, the importance of community engagement and our long-term financial sustainability. So they are our 5 strategic areas that we focus all of our work. The next slide speaks to a page out of our annual report, and if you'd like to learn more about our work on an annual basis, please feel free to visit our website, and you'll see our annual reports published which capture a lot of the busy work that our team of 250 people, employing largely local people to do this important work across the whole of the Great Ocean Road region, so I do encourage you to go there. Without having the time to highlight all of the great work that's being done, I did just want to bring attention to 2 significant projects. And this speaks again to the story of the formation period of the authority and the region. Just this week, we've seen the publishing of the first set of Great Ocean Road Coast and Parks Environmental Economic Account. This is an incredibly important piece of work, a significant evidence base. This is work that's been led by DEECA and began in 2020 as part of our legislation and was completed and signed off by the Minister in January this year. The development of the Economic Environmental Account is a major step forward in ensuring our natural environment is properly valued. The report clearly shows the economic and social significance of our ecosystems and the role in supporting biodiversity, tourism and climate resilience. It can be reviewed in detail. We've got a web link that will pop into the chat, but it's available for everyone to enjoy. Many of you may be wondering what an economic environmental account is and how it can be used. It is a really important asset within that broader suite of strategic instruments and the evidence base that informs that you've seen captured in the slides today. It's based on the concept of natural capital, which refers to the stock of natural resources, such as geology, soil, air, water, living organisms. These natural assets provide ecosystem services which deliver significant benefits to our people, our communities and our economy. The Economic Environmental Account assigns a monetary value to nature's contributions, making the economic case for protecting and restoring natural resources. In an organisational context, this helps integrate nature into strategic and operational decision making. The Economic Environmental Account for the Great Ocean Road Coast and Parks provides us with an evidence base to inform our land management strategy, our planning, our visitation management strategy, and all of our investment decisions. I've always been a great fan to recognise that we need to measure to be able to appropriately advocate and have that evidence base. These baseline accounts align with the United Nations system for environmental economic accounting. The analysis undertaken to inform these accounts suggests that the ecosystems of the Great Ocean Road Coast and Parks deliver a range of ecosystem services that provide significant socio-economic value to our society. The value is estimated to be over $100 million per year to the economy. and over 700 million per year to the community based on the subset services assessed. We are nearing completion of our natural capital roadmap that the authority has established together with our partners, which brings this account into operational practice. I think it would be beneficial in future to have a presentation on this detail once it's been finalised, but I think you can agree an incredibly important milestone which informs the next stages ahead. The second strategic document I want to bring your attention to is the State of the Great Ocean Road Coast and Parks Report. This is the first time this report will be developed, and the report is currently being developed by the Commissioner for the Environment and Sustainability, Dr. Helen Vaughan, and her team, and it's expected for release mid this year. The report assesses the health of our region using ecosystem health and social science indicators. It covers key environmental elements of land, water, air, and ecosystems. Our team, along with other stakeholders and experts, will review the draft this month. We've just received it. And following this review, it will move into an approval phase before release mid-year. This report is not designed as a performance scorecard for environmental agencies. Instead, it is a synthesis of information and data trends and provides key recommendations for policymakers, practitioners, and scientists. These recommendations focus on improving acquisition, quality, access, and management of environmental data, and will enhance the work we do in specific policy and program areas. This report is a significant step in shaping the future environmental management of the Great Ocean Road region and its iconic coast and parks. So we do look forward to reviewing the draft, and I think you can agree for the data that we do have, it provides an incredibly important baseline, but for the data we don't have, it just as equally important highlights the gaps and where we need to do the necessary work. So I highlight these two pieces of work, significant environmental leadership, formative strategic pieces of work, which gives some indication to how we are bringing the authority's purpose to life. Now, I know because we are in the tourism conversation that importantly, we're going to want to hear about today the Sustainable Visitation Management Strategy. And I think, Peter, I've probably got about 5 minutes or so to whiz through this, but these slides will be available. Following the important work that's been done by the state, and in particular the strategic framework plan that's been led by DEECA, we have been working closely alongside to identify the translation of our role as lead agency in visitation management. To achieve this, we will be developing a sustainable visitation management strategy. The next slide speaks to the challenge and speaks to the importance of sustainable visitation. And I know we've spoken a lot about this together on these conversations thus far, so let's not stay there. What's important to understand is this piece of work will be commencing this year, and the strategic objectives that we look to achieve from this piece of work is to assess current and projected visitation trends to determine environmental, social and infrastructure impacts, to develop a strategic data-driven approach to managing tourism sustainability, to ensure compliance with relevant acts and policies while fostering regional economic benefits, to protect the cultural and natural assets along the Great Ocean Road, leverage new technologies for enhanced data collection and visitation monitoring, ensure the visitor economy is positively uplifted through strategic actions and implementation, and support the infrastructure planning through the world-class visitor experiences. So at a high level, that's what to expect from the Sustainable Visitation Management Plan. But getting into some level of detail, when is this going to happen? What does it mean? Obviously, it has been a strategic decision to ensure that we're informed by the great work done by TRC and, of course, DEECA, and without duplicating that work effort. So we've been carefully navigating the right timing to kick off this work. And given the significance and the importance of this strategy and significant piece of work, our first step is actually going to be a scoping phase. And the good news for all of those on today's webinar is that the scoping phase will be informed by some genuine and community consultation and working together with our strategic partners. So we want to understand what actually is in the scope of this work, what information do we already have, how is that informed, and what do we need to make future decisions for the next 50 years and to ensure those values that we have of intergenerational equity are lived by, with a commitment to our purpose as one integrated living entity. So I have some key points on this slide. I'm reluctant to go through them in too much detail, but we have engaged TRC Tourism, who have been working closely with DEECA on the strategic framework plan to support the scoping program to understand this work. We'll ensure that we do have that alignment and that the community involvement is a key priority. Once the scoping work is finished, we will move into the stage 1 of the strategic visitation management plan, which will include values mapping, looking again at further data collection and analysis without duplication to the work already done, understanding that carrying capacity, incredibly important to make those future decisions, get some benchmarking and have some best practice conversations, both here locally, whether it's from Budjabim or internationally. We're not the first to embark on this journey of tackling tourism and sustainable tourism in an appropriate way. We will do it in 2 phases and ensure that we've got a clear action-orientated approach to the work that is coming. We will, again, in these stages, have community consultation and involvement, understanding we need a whole of Great Ocean Road picture, but also understanding the unique identity of the communities along Great Ocean Road. There's also significant additional pieces of strategic planning that's being done alongside this work, including our whole of Great Ocean Road region land management strategy, our whole of Great Ocean Road coastal adaptation planning work, of course sitting under the umbrella of the strategic framework plan, and several other localised strategic planning pieces of work. A lot of work underway. I hope that gives some confidence to the direction we're heading and who we are while we exist. Peter, I did whiz through those first points about who we are very quickly and may have jumbled across that a little bit there, but I know importantly people want to know, when is this happening and how can I be involved? We're intending to kick off the scoping phase for this work in May this year. And depending on the landing, I might need to readjust with some of Ruth's timelines there to ensure that we're moving appropriately step by step with our DEECA colleagues. We'll be looking to further this work next year, and we'd hope to bring it to conclusion by the end of 2026 or early in the year after. So important work needs to be informed by the voices of many and the evidence base that exists, but does put us in good stead for that future chapter planning. Before I do jump off, here are our contact details if there's any further information required on what I've spoken about today. And I do want to just thank again Gorkan for bringing the conversation together. It's been great from our perspective to ensure we can bring the many diverse voices to engage in the discussion, the debate, ask questions, test ourselves, but importantly know what the many agencies are doing to respond to this complex challenge, recognising again the importance of the Great Ocean Road region. So thank you to everyone for the opportunity this afternoon.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Jodie. As I think everyone would probably attest, this has been an incredibly rich session so far. There are a lot of questions. I'm not going to be able to do justice to most of them, I think, even by putting them forward. And I just firstly want to suggest we are going to have the session next week, and there will be an ongoing discussion which comes out of this. And there's a lot of information which we've had put before us, which I think will be worked over by us as communities over the next year or two. But I do have some questions, some very good questions have come forward, and I just want to highlight, try to draw some of the synergies between them and put them before you. One of the things that struck me as being evident was that on the one hand, we have got this sense of tourism being a driving imperative and a growing force, including within our region. And I'm mindful of, for example, the 2020 Deloitte's report on visitor demand and accommodation, which admittedly occurred right at the height of the COVID pandemic, but drew on 2019 data and then looked into the future. And what the Deloitte report projected, and I think that government policy at the state level, at the national level, perhaps the regional level, is all still following this line, is a very substantial increase in visitations to our region, going from roughly 4 million in 2009 to 7.4 million in 2019, and a projected visitation of about 10.9 million in 2030. So there is this torrent of visitation coming our way. First thing for us to consider. The second thing for us to consider is that we have a number of strategies and proposals and plans that are being developed, but they don't seem to be coming forward fast and hitting the ground fast. So, for example, with the strategic plan, that was the legislation which initiated that was in 2020, and yet even now in 2026, we still haven't seen the 50-year strategic plan or anything more significant. So I want to go first of all to the problem of governance. Why is it that it has taken? Why is it taken so long for us to get any sort of strategic planning in place, looking into the future? What have been the governance impediments? What have been the problems that have slowed that down? Or is it simply a reliance on or an acceptance that there is going to be this torrent of tourism and actually strategy won't touch it much at all? Any of you? Mirava, Ruth?
I think I'm going to speak to the practical nature of tourism in the landscape of Victoria. The impact of restrictions that occurred through COVID. I'd also suggest that there's a lot of natural disasters that have occurred over the last few years, particularly with bushfires, flooding, etc. Not necessarily within the region of the Great Ocean Road, but anything that becomes an impact on state budget also becomes an impact on the delivery of policy and strategy. However, we have delivered in accordance with what the Regional Tourism Review, which had significant community consultation in 2019, and then the funding that came out through the Recovery and Reform Plan, we delivered ahead of schedule. And that enabled the further funding of elements like the Destination Management Plan that Liz Price's team have also committed and delivered. And I think that that's demonstrating of the commitment that government and the department have to tourism. But I can't really speak to many other strategic imposts from our perspective with the department, so I can't speak for Ruth from your perspective, but there's the flow-on effect of the overarching strategy and how that then supports additional policy.
I can jump in and give our corner of the world to Bob Dworth, Peter. For us, it makes perfect sense to be where we're at now. I can't speak to the frustrations that have come potentially for decades. There's been significant change. I've been a Torquay resident for almost a few decades now, and I constantly hear complaints and frustrations about tourism. But for us, why I say it makes sense is we need to get the whole estate in one place first. We need to understand the economic, social, cultural values. We need to do the informed work to have the conversations with our communities and our expert advisors to be able to do that. So it may feel like it's taken a long time, but I would suggest that it's through the voice of the community for our creation as one single entity to transfer those 900 parcels of land and move from 950 to 170,000 is significant change. And it is building the vehicle in which we can work to drive this. We're forming relationships. I hear frustrations almost on a daily basis about we need to do X, Y, and Z yesterday and tomorrow. It won't all happen at once, and that is part of change. It can be slow, it can be frustrating. There are people who will not like the change. There's cranky people all over the place. But I think we're at, whatever's happened historically to get to this point, I think we're exactly where we need to be now, and we are very well placed. And you can see that through the presentation this afternoon. And all the speakers we've had through the series, there's great alignment. That's the great news. We're talking to each other. We're having conversations. We're very well placed. Everything is not solved, but we are very well placed, is my view.
So there are no barriers, there's no resistance between different levels of government and...
Oh, yeah. Yes, there are barriers. Yes, there are barriers and complexity. Well, there's one road. There's one road, so that's a challenge. It's being able to shift the change. I'm sure that Liz would speak very quickly to say that if we're looking to improve, not necessarily will increase the numbers of tourism, but shift the dispersal and the yield, that is very challenging. So Liz spoke about the needing to increase the product offering so that we're able to help support the economy. I think getting our state of the economic environmental accounts helps us understand the environmental values that can inform these discussions. We haven't had that before. That's been released this week. There's a long list of barriers, I think, and challenges, but I think we're well placed to help navigate that. And government change is slow, because Crown land, which is less than 30% of our entire Victorian government estate, is a precious, it's a precious asset. And we need to ensure that we're appropriately working with all of the stakeholders, communities, our rights holders to inform that, as well as our evidence base. So that takes time. The biggest part of my processes, honestly, the work that we do is community engagement. The longest part is working together with our communities and bringing that evidence base forward. So that's an essential part of the process. And I'll let others speak. I feel like I've got the mic too long.
Ruth, what do you?
No, it's really important, and supporting some of what Jodie said. I mean, we all know tourism, the nature of it in itself is cross-cutting. There is a question of who is responsible, because it does come across so many of our different portfolios and people on the call here. And it's an issue that's grappled with across multiple destinations and multiple, globally. And that's not to say, we don't do anything about it, but I think, and to echo what Jodie's just said, is we're in the best possible position we have been for years. We have a reform that's been implemented for the whole of the Great Ocean Road based on a task force in 2017. We stood up a dedicated authority, which Jodie's talking to as well, that now holistically manages the coasts and parks region. We have a strategic framework plan, which I was talking to, which will update previous strategies, and importantly provides a framework for all those multiple parties and all of us on the call today who all want to see this come together for a successful outcome for all of us. And I think I understand frustration. I also think the destination has matured as well, and community is now experiencing the other side of tourism, which is that not all tourism have great outcomes. And that's what we're starting to feel. And so from my perspective, we can be impatient and we can work in that space. But I also think we're in the best possible position we are at the moment, with an opportunity to fix some of these issues. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to be getting on that same page and pulling in the same direction, because we're in a really good place now, more than we ever have been.
I was just pointing to, I think, the contradiction, or at least the tension between the projections for where we're going to end up with tourism in 2030 in the region, and the other measurements and the absences and difficulties that we have in working out whether that is actually the right level of tourism or not. I just wanted to go to two things that you raised, Ruth, which I think are really interesting. The first is the issue of active visitation. Matt, actually, I want to tie together something that you talked about and also Jodie brought forward. The issue of active visitation management on the one hand, and the issue of having risk-based assessment. And I love your risk-based assessment tool on the other. Now, to go to Jodie's point very quickly, the Environment Economic Account report, which came out, is a desk report which highlighted very clearly the data absences. It was based on very, very dodgy data, not bad data. The writers themselves acknowledged how limited the data were. They did the best they could with it. But there's a really significant absence in terms of genuine monitoring of environmental and social and economic outcomes. And I think the State of the Environment report is going to show precisely the same thing. So in the absence of robust data and monitoring, how do you drive a risk management tool? And in the absence of all of those sorts of things being robust, how then do you develop targets, a strategy? Or do you need to be much more conservative than we're currently being?
And it's a good question. And I think, look, the answer to that is there's many answers to that. I mean, one is the data. We're in a good position now with, as you've just acknowledged, with the accounts coming out and the State of the Environment report in progress that talks to which of those data points are absent and which are present. And so, that gives us clarity and impetus to build on them. But I think there's also a point where a lot of the tourism data that you get, we're very clear on things like visitation trends, broader impacts.
How do you actually gauge visitation? What sort of granular monitoring is done of that?
I'd have to ask, to get to that granular technical detail, I could pull in our TRC partners to talk through some of the elements that will be looked at in terms of that risk management approach. But, I'm confident between that and the earlier question before around community input into that, that's a really big part of some of this as well, is the anecdotes and the lived, I hate that word, lived experience, but the experience of communities in terms of dealing with visitation as well. And I don't think we're in a position where we don't understand the problems and don't have a good grasp on what we're seeing. I think collectively, I think we've got a pretty good picture of it. I think what's missing is a collective framework to be able to solve those problems as a group, all in the one direction, I think is what's missing.
So again, I'm just trying to do justice to the questions that have come through and build on that comment you've made. You talked about active visitation management, and we know what the limitations of the Great Ocean Road are. It's a damn small little strip running through the most beautiful coastline in the universe. We have come to the point where dispersal, there are some really significant issues in terms of managing the number of visitations. And also there are certain points at which we are either building or running to capacity, for example, the 12 apostles, where dispersal is not really an option. So how do you engage in active visitation management?
Yeah, and look, some of that will come through the work in terms of designing the risk management tool, in terms of working out what types of measures are going to be effective to be able to work out where those thresholds are met and to implement tools. But your question of 12As in terms of guiding dispersal, I mean, there's a lot of options now that you'd be looking at in terms of how the new model is going to be rolled out in terms of pre-booking times at the 12 apostles. So you're doing dispersing visitation, not just at the, people are running in and out for the 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock spot and heading back into town and spending 30 minutes on the site. You're spreading that dispersal of visitation from a half-hour visit to a 2.5-hour visit all throughout times throughout the day. And by doing that, you're going to get visitors then who'll need to stay overnight. You'll get visitors who will have a couple of spare hours to spend, and you'll have opportunities to disperse them further throughout the region. And doing that deliberately as a group means you can target where you want those visitors to be dispersed and where you want them to be, spending their tourism dollars. And also, part of that is the tourism dollars, but also is looking at the environmental impact. And I think that's the key for me here. Is it's not capping visitor numbers. We all, it's not a question of too many visitors. It's too many visitors at the wrong times in the wrong place. So that key of dispersal and demand management is going to be really important.
But can I bring that? So that's the 12As. Let's look at other parts of the coast. Again, I'm trying to do justice to some of the comments that were made. One comment, maybe unfairly, said, Wye River, what benefit is there of the tourism dollar and the tourism economy? There are certain hamlets and places along the road which don't really benefit greatly from tourism except as an impost both on the environment and the community. So how do you deal with visitation there?
I think that, Peter, that's what we do need to explore. It'll be different for each community. I think that understanding tourism as we want to define the visitor experience, that Wye River Caravan Park there is a really important part of that community, and the families that visit that year on year, it's an important part of the visitors that come who volunteer at the Surf Lifesaving Club. There's so many elements to what we consider in this tourism conversation. It really does need that broader explanation and help to unpack some of these complex questions. One of the things that I think needs to be captured, and it'd be remiss of me not to say to this forum, is the cost of visitation. That there was some early data that said that day trip visitors are contributing 13 cents to the care for the Great Ocean Road, but the impact is clearly far greater. We've seen communities, there's a community in New Zealand where they've had to move the community because the road's fallen into the ocean. It hasn't been cared for in the way that it should, and I think that there should be an appropriate model that's well considered where the user or the visitor needs to contribute to care for the natural assets so that it is there for the generations that come. And that regenerative tourism model speaks to that. The need for a paradigm shift speaks to that. Understanding the holistic picture as one integrated entity speaks to that. So it does all need to be considered. One decision has a consequence to another, and it will be different for Kennet River, Wye River, Apollo Bay and Holland. But we are hearing similar concerns and questions. So I think it's important to keep asking the questions. It's important to keep having the conversations, and let's not get stuck.
Well, your point about carrying capacity is a very important one.
100% agree.
Many of the comments that came through was early and effective community consultation helps define carrying capacity in many ways, which, of course, community groups are very keen to participate in, and there's a lot of mobilisation around those sorts of things. We're running out of time. I'm just wondering if Miravi, you have anything you'd like to add at this stage?
No, nothing further from me. I've actually really enjoyed listening to my colleagues as well. So I feel like it's been a great panel that you've put together, Peter. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
It's really frustrating. We have run out of time, and there is so much more we want to talk about. So we're going to have to hold it over till next week. I'm extraordinarily grateful to all of you for your comments and for your insights. This is a discussion that clearly is going to keep on going. So until next week, I'll just quickly put up a, if I can find it. No, I can't. It doesn't matter. Thank you to all who've actually participated in this. There's a whole bunch of groups and others, including GORCAPA, in terms of the support that's provided technically. Thank you specifically to Bridget for this, which has made this series as good, as rich, and as ongoing as I think it is. So I hope to see all of you, many of you, all of you, and more of you next week. Thank you all, and Jodie, Ruth, and Mira particularly. Bye all.
Thank you, Peter.